Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we're going to be talking about how to run Craftworld Eldar Warp Spiders in 10th edition, and this is part of my Aspect Warrior series, where I plan to cover each and every Aspect Warrior and the best ways to use them in 10th edition. So Warp Spiders are actually one of the more competitive Aspect Warriors in this edition, and I truly believe that every single Aspect Warrior, with the exception, of course, of the Crimson Hunter, is at the very least usable in some way. Which is really good, right? I mean, you want to have an index that you can use pretty much every unit in the index without feeling bad or, at a disadvantage. However, Warp Spiders are truly one of those units that stands above the rest because of their unique combination of abilities and powerful weapons. So without further ado, let us go ahead and dive right into it and talk about Warp Spiders in 10th edition. But first, a quick overview of what we're going to be looking at today in this video. We're going to be looking at the stats, weapons, and special rules of the Warp Spiders. We're going to be looking at their strengths and weaknesses, their combos and synergies, and lastly, the role Warp Spiders play in an Eldar army and how to make the most out of them. So first, looking at the stat line of the Warp Spiders, pretty basic stat line as far as jump infantry go. They have a 12-inch movement, which is pretty fast, not quite as fast as Swooping Hawks, but they do have a better armor save to compensate for that. Now, of course, the armor save is not going to really help you in a vast majority of cases, but they do also come with a 5+ invul against high AP attacks. As far as their ranged weapons go, they have very short range at range 12, but they have D6 attacks, torrent, and devastating wounds, which is a really powerful combination together. Basically, you auto hit with everything you roll, and then 6 is to wound, cause mortal wounds. Other than that, the attacks have no AP, so they're basically just like a flamer without the ignores cover rule. And this actually makes them great at dealing Overwatch damage. So auto hits, of course, also work for Overwatch. So if you spend a CP to Overwatch with these guys, they're auto hitting with all of their attacks. And another little trick you can do with Overwatch if you think your opponent is going to charge is to use Phantasm in the opponent's movement phase, move the Warp Spiders into range of a charge from a different unit, and then, of course, when that opponent declares a charge, your Warp Spiders will be in range to Overwatch them, regardless of whether or not they're actually being charged. Because that's how Overwatch works now, and it's pretty powerful. But you definitely don't want these guys in melee themselves because their close combat is quite honestly trash. Strength 3, AP 0, damage 1. They hit on a 3+, they only have 2 attacks apiece. The Exarch, however, can be armed with power blades, which you would always take. And basically, it's just a power weapon. It's nothing special, doesn't have any bonus attacks, damage, or AP. Just pretty much a power weapon. Which could give you a slight edge in combat against weaker targets like Imperial Guard or Cultists, things like that. As for their abilities, they have Deep Strike. They also have the ability to double their movement at the risk of a mortal wound on a 1. So you roll a dice. On a 2+, everything works fine. On a 1, it still works, but one of the Warp Spiders is claimed by the Warp and suffers 1 mortal wound. Take note that sometimes it might be better to actually just put a wound on the Exarch. This does mean your Exarch will die first because you'll have to allocate wounds to wounded models before you do unwounded models. But when you do shoot for the first time, you'll at least be shooting with a full unit. That is, if you're unlucky enough to roll a 1 in the first place. And having the ability to move 24 inches with a unit makes them the fastest unit in the entire index. As for their unit size, they can be taken in 5 or 10, just like all Aspect Warriors. The Exarch can get an extra Death Spinner and Power Blades. You're always going to give the Exarch this no matter what. I don't even think there's a model without 2 Death Spinners and Power Blades. So, we're waiting on that still, GW. Come on. I swear, Warp Spiders are one of the oldest sculpts, and they're really showing their age. We really need some new ones. As for their points cost, they cost 100 points for 5 and 200 points for 10, which is a little bit on the expensive side, but for what they can do, it's probably a pretty fair price. And as far as their keywords go, they are infantry, they do have the jump pack keyword, and they have the fly keyword, which is probably the most important because it means when they're moving those 24 inches, they get to fly over enemy units. Okay, so what are their strengths and their weaknesses? So their strengths are they're extremely fast. Like I mentioned before, they can move 24 inches a turn, which is great for objective play. Can get them in range to score a lot of objectives. Their weapons auto hit and have devastating wounds as well. This is great for Overwatch, but also just great in general, especially against units that might not be able to be targeted outside of 12 inches or have stealth or something like that, which would make it difficult for your other units to hit them. As far as their weaknesses, though, they're a bit on the pricey side. They're 20 points per model, which is the second most expensive in the codex behind Shining Spears. So, pretty expensive for infantry, considering how cheap the rest of the Aspect Warriors in our index are. They are also really vulnerable to Overwatch due to their short range. You do have to be careful when moving them so that when you end a move, they're not within Overwatch range or they're not within line of sight. Because of the fact that they're so squishy, toughness 3, 3 up armor is not going to save you against a lot of Overwatch out there. So make sure you are careful with these guys when moving them around the battlefield. Some possible combos and synergies include Phantasm and Fire and Fade. Both are great and excellent for getting them out of trouble or onto an objective. You can use both of these abilities after they move their 24 inches. So Fire and Fade, yeah, you won't get the 24-inch movement, but you will get their base movement of 12, which is still incredibly strong. 12 inches is nothing to scoff at. It is a great distance and can get you from one piece of obscuring terrain to another very easily or onto an objective after they kill their target. Wave Serpents, Death Jesters, and Wraith Seers are also really good with these guys, and the reason being is they can force battle shock tests. This allows your spiders to move more safely throughout the battlefield. If there's a key unit, like an Infernus squad or something like that, that is placed in a position to overwatch your spiders as they come in. And by the way, any decent Space Marine player with an Infernus squad will use their Infernus squad as a buffer between your unit of warp spiders and your more fragile units and their more fragile units as well. I played a game the other day against my buddy who used Infernus squads in the exact same way. Set them up into a position where if I moved forward into range of his scout snipers, his Infernus squad would be able to overwatch. So you do have to watch out for that and make sure that those units are dealt with properly. Wave Serpents, Death Jesters, and Wraith Seers can help with that by denying their overwatch ability. And for those of you who don't know, if a unit is battle shocked, they cannot declare Overwatch because they can't be targeted with stratagems. So just keep that in mind as well. The Viper is really good as well at removing units' cover, making them easier to kill. Warp Spiders benefit from this because they want to target light infantry, and light infantry benefits from cover the most. So, 4+ save unit turning to a 3+ or a 5+ to a 4+ is actually a big durability boost. And being able to remove this makes the Warp Spider's job much easier, as these are typically the kind of units that are going to be sitting on objectives anyway that the Warp Spiders want to remove. Swooping Hawks are also a good combination with Warp Spiders. They play off their strengths, they lend their fire to kill harder infantry targets when they need to, and of course, they help keep your enemy on their toes, because Swooping Hawks can come in anywhere on the board, and Warp Spiders can pretty much threaten a large part of the board themselves. So using them in conjunction with each other to score things like engage on all fronts and behind enemy lines is a very effective way to get secondaries, which, by the way, I will be making a video of in the next couple of weeks. Because I think that, in general, objectives are much easier to score for Eldar in this edition, which is good. Remember, we were really struggling with scoring objectives, especially primary objectives in 9th edition, and I think this dynamic has changed a little bit. So that's a good thing. So what is the role of Warp Spiders in an Eldar army, and how do you make the most out of them? So Warp Spiders are great for scoring on secondary objectives like behind enemy lines and engage in all fronts. And these, in my opinion, are kind of the easiest ones to score on for a fast-moving Eldar army. Engage on all fronts is a little bit more forgiving. You can be within 3 inches of any other board edge, so it's a little easier to score on than last edition. Deploying teleport homers is also a very good one because Warp Spiders will often be in the enemy deployment zone, so they can not only score on behind enemy lines, but they can also score on deploy teleport homers as well. So that's a very good one as well that I didn't mention here, but is also pretty effective. They are also best used when moving up the flanks while staying behind obscuring terrain to minimize overwatch. So you really don't want to just throw these guys in front of the enemy army and say, hey, shoot me after you're done shooting. That's definitely not what you want to do with them. You want to move them carefully up the flanks because they are a fragile unit, and that may mean not shooting them for a turn. Yes, they can threaten units on turn 1 technically because they have a 24-inch movement, but you might not want to do it just because of the fact that there will be better opportunities later in the game. And also, just wasting warp spiders for pure damage purposes is really not the best way to use them. I know it's tempting because they have really good damage, for their cost. Devastating Wounds and Torrent is a good combination of abilities. They're just not really a unit you can afford to throw away like that. So do be careful with them. Moving them up the flanks carefully behind obscuring terrain is probably the best way to go. Alternatively, they can be held in deep strike and come in the back of your opponent's deployment zone later in the game. So, from turn 2 onward. Luckily, having deep strike means that you can come in anywhere and not just on table edges, like strategic reserve. Now, if you do want to run them for damage, there is a way to do this. You run them as a unit of 10. They have quite a bit of potential, especially when combined with Overwatch. They do have a limited range, but within that range, they auto-hit, which is extremely good with Overwatch. And again, they do have devastating wounds. So they're auto-hitting, and every 6 to wound is going to be immortal. That's pretty powerful. The unit will set you back 200 points, but it is a pretty strong unit to use. I suggest that even if you're using them this way, it's best to keep them on the flanks behind obscuring terrain during the first turn. You don't want to just run them up to the enemy, shoot, absorb an Overwatch, and then probably die. You just don't want to do it. There's too many strong units that can benefit from Overwatch now that will kill several warp spiders on Overwatch, so you do need to be careful about that. Because killing 2 or 3 warp spiders, even 4 sometimes, is always going to be worth a command point for your opponent. So don't think that they're not going to use it because it's only going to kill 2 or 3 warp spiders. They will use it, and it will put a serious dent in your damage capabilities. Lastly, warp spiders are really good at dealing with lone operatives. So because of their high movement speed and the fact that, opponents can't really screen them that well because of it, right? I mean, this isn't a deep strike move. They don't have to land within, outside of 9 inches or anything like that. They just move 24 inches. So they're really great at pinning down lone operatives. They have a 36-inch threat range when they do this, and they will always be in range to shoot and kill a lone operative because their rule is they can't be targeted outside of 12 inches. Well, warp spiders have a 12-inch range. So if the warp spiders are in range, they're in range to ignore the lone operative ability. And this is a weakness of Wraith Knights and other long-range shooting, which is why you see these in a lot of competitive lists now because, well, quite simply, Wraith Knights don't have a way to deal with lone operatives or scout snipers and other units with similar abilities that you can't target outside of 12 inches. So warp spiders are a really good answer to this. They do a very good job at killing things like scout snipers and other lone operatives. If you're facing another Eldar player, they're fantastic against death jesters. Death jesters are, very squishy. And on average, your warp spiders will kill a death jester pretty much every single time. And they will do significant damage against scout snipers. So yeah, warp spiders, really good unit, well-rounded. They cover the weaknesses of a lot of other competitive units like Wraithguard, Wraith Knights, and of course Fire Prisms. And they give your army a lot of objective control. So in conclusion, warp spiders are a phenomenal unit for scoring on objectives and taking out threats that the rest of your army can't deal with effectively. Things with lone operative or other units that can't be targeted outside of 12, they're amazing against. In units of 10, they do have really good Overwatch and can melt armor and invulnerable saves with mortal wounds. It is an expensive unit, but if used correctly, it can be very powerful. Overall, warp spiders are a really powerful unit to include in any list. You often see competitive lists running a couple units of these just because of how versatile they are, and the fact that they can also threaten multiple different types of targets. Now, a lot of you out there might be saying, well, Proxy Hammer, why would I ever take Swooping Hawks when I can take a unit of warp spiders? They seem to be doing the same exact thing. And yes, although both of them do pretty much do the same thing as far as their secondary objective game, Swooping Hawks are a little more resistant to Overwatch because of their 24 inches. They don't have to engage units directly. So They're a little bit more resistant to things like Overwatch, even though they're more fragile. And they also have the Sky Leap ability, which makes it harder for enemies to pin them down. And you can misdirect enemies in a lot of ways with Swooping Hawks. Warp Spiders are more direct. Your opponent knows where they are, they know their threat range, and they can plan accordingly. Swooping Hawks, on the other hand, can come in anywhere on the board. So I think Swooping Hawks have a little bit more mobility and their reserve game is better. And Warp Spiders have the ability to take out key targets that have stealth or lone operative type of abilities. And their damage is significantly better. I mean, Swooping Hawks are good against light infantry, of course, but Warp Spiders being able to deal devastating wounds are just going to melt through armor altogether. So unit of 5 of those, on average, will do about 3 to 4 mortal wounds. And that's going to be a lot better damage than what Swooping Hawks can do against heavy targets. However, Swooping Hawks are also cheaper, and again, like I said, more resistant to Overwatch. All right, everybody, that is going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching. We'll have more Aspect Warriors coming this week. I plan to cover Striking Scorpions and maybe Dire Avengers later this week, probably on Monday or Tuesday, so look forward to that. Thank you so much once again to all my patrons and supporters who have supported the channel over the last months. Your help truly has made the channel better and allowed me to produce more content. So thank you so much for that support. If you do want to support the channel, I'll leave my Patreon and PayPal links in the description for those of you who do. And again, thank you so much to all of those who have. My Patreon and YouTube membership does come with a free invite to our Discord community, which is a community of Eldar players who are very helpful and courteous when talking about army lists and strategies. So come check them out if you want to. And as always, you can always ask me any questions directly if you need help with anything at all. I'm always there to help a fellow Eldar player out. All right, everybody, that is going to be it for today. Peace out. See you guys later and have a good one, you guys. See you in the next video.